My in-laws killed my dog, so I sued them for $10,000. My in-laws killed my dog. And when I sued them for $10,000, they had the nerve to look our friends and family in the eye and tell everyone that I was the greedy, heartless one. They truly believed the law was on their side, that my best friend, my constant companion, was legally no different than a piece of furniture. They thought they could get away with it. They thought the truth would stay buried 6 feet under, right along with him. They never imagined I would find a way to make a court of law see what they had done. They never expected the judge to hear the one thing they fought so desperately to keep hidden. This isn't just a story about the grief of losing a pet. It's a story about betrayal, about the cold-bloodedness that can hide behind a polite smile. It's about what happens when you are pushed to the absolute edge, when your world is burned to the ground, and the only thing left to do is rise from the ashes and fight back with everything you have. His name was Barnaby. Even saying his name now brings back the exact feeling of his fur under my hand. He was this goofy, slightly oversized golden retriever with one ear that always flopped over at a comical angle and a tail that was basically a perpetual motion machine, capable of clearing a coffee table with a single happy wag. To say he was just a pet is the greatest understatement of my life. He was my rock. My shadow. He was the warm, heavy weight on my feet that kept me grounded during long, stressful days working from home. He was the world's most enthusiastic, mud-loving hiking partner, always forging ahead on the trail but constantly looking back to make sure I was still there. And he was the big, furry confidant who'd rest his heavy head on my lap when he just knew I was sad, absorbing my tears into his coat without a single word needed. He saw me through a major career change, a cross-country move, and the death of my mother. He was, in every sense of the word, family. When I married my husband Mark, he knew it was a package deal. You get me, you get Barnaby. Mark thankfully adored him. He loved the way Barnaby would greet him at the door as if he'd just returned from a decade-long war. But his parents, my in-laws, that was a different story entirely. On the surface they were polite enough. They were masters of that kind of brittle, paper-thin civility. When they'd come to our house, they'd give Barnaby a stiff, hesitant little pat on the head and say something like, "Oh, what a lovely animal," with the same enthusiasm you might use for a well-behaved zoo creature. But I saw the looks that flickered across their faces when they thought I wasn't watching. The way they'd flinch almost imperceptibly when he'd trot over for a friendly sniff, as if he were covered in filth. I saw the way my mother-in-law Helen would pointedly and performatively brush invisible dog hair off the couch, her face a perfect mask of quiet disgust. Their home was a sterile museum of beige carpets and glass curios. Ours was a lived-in space, complete with fur tumbleweeds and the occasional muddy paw print. To them our home was a mess and Barnaby was the cause. They'd make these little jokes, that weren't jokes at all, just passive-aggressive jabs wrapped in a chuckle. "I swear she loves this dog more than you," my father-in-law David would say to Mark, but the laugh never ever reached his cold eyes. Or Helen would let out a long theatrical sigh and say, "Must be nice having a dog to dote on instead of thinking about giving us grandchildren." It was a constant low-grade hum of disapproval. To them, Barnaby wasn't a dog. He was a rival for my affection. He was this furry, four-legged symbol of a life I was living that they just didn't get, or more accurately, didn't approve of. He represented my choice to prioritize my career, to wait on having kids, to build a life on my own terms. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself I was being too sensitive, that this was just how they were. But there was a coldness there, a deep-seated resentment that was always simmering just under the surface, waiting for a chance to boil over. The call came on a Saturday afternoon in late September. The air was just starting to get that crisp autumn edge. My husband and I were out of town for a friend's wedding, the first real trip we'd taken in years, a chance to just be a couple and forget about work and responsibilities. We'd asked my in-laws to watch Barnaby. In my mind, it wasn't just a practical request, it was an olive branch. A way of saying, he's part of our family and you are too. Let's try to bridge this gap. They agreed, almost a little too eagerly in retrospect. "Of course, dear," Helen had said. "We'd be delighted. You two go have fun." My mother-in-law was on the phone, her voice a shrill, theatrical wail that immediately sent a spike of ice water through my veins. It wasn't the sound of genuine grief. It was a performance. There'd been an accident, she cried between dramatic, gulping sobs. Barnaby got out. The gate was left open. He ran into the street. She was so sorry. The world just stopped. I remember the bizarre, surreal sensation of hearing the muffled sound of a Kool and the Gang song from the wedding reception down the hall, and then absolute crushing silence in my own head. My husband took the phone, his face draining of all color. I just collapsed onto the stiff hotel bedspread, my mind a total, merciful blank. We drove the 5 hours back the next day in near total silence, the unspoken questions hanging in the air between us like a thick fog. By the time we got to their house, they had already had him cremated. We didn't want you to have to see him like that, David said, his expression carefully arranged into one of solemn sympathy. They handed me a generic, soulless little wooden box. It was shockingly light. There was no vet report. No bill from an animal hospital. No collar. Just a box. And a story that felt completely, fundamentally wrong, like a badly rehearsed lie. A few days later, a sympathy card arrived from our local vet clinic. It's standard practice, I know, a kind gesture. But inside, beneath the printed condolences, there was a handwritten note from Dr. Evans, the vet who'd known Barnaby since he was a clumsy 8-week-old puppy. It said, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Please know we did everything we could." The words felt strange. We did everything we could? The story was that he died instantly. My hands were shaking as I dialed the clinic's number. I asked to speak with her. I asked her what she meant. She hesitated, the professional caution in her voice battling with a clear sense of human decency. "I'm not sure what his parents told you," she began slowly, "but Barnaby did not die on impact. They brought him in, but his injuries, they didn't align with a typical vehicle accident." The dam of professional silence broke. She told me, Barnaby hadn't just been hit by a car. He had signs of severe repeated blunt force trauma to his head and torso. Someone had hurt him. Brutally. And worse, she said, based on his condition they had waited hours, to bring him in. By the time he got to her, it was far, far too late to save his life. The world didn't just stop this time. It shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. The neat, convenient story they had built for us didn't just fall apart. It revealed something monstrous and unthinkable underneath. The image of them waiting, listening to him suffer, while they decided what to do, what lie to tell, is something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. We drove to their house immediately. We didn't even call. My husband, his face ashen and set like stone, held the vet's notes, which we'd gone to pick up a printed copy of. We didn't want a fight. We didn't want screaming or accusations. We just wanted the truth. We needed, for our own sanity, to hear them say it. They denied everything. Vehemently. They doubled down, shifting from feigned sympathy to outright indignation. They called me hysterical. They said I was overwrought with grief and not thinking clearly. They accused our trusted vet of being incompetent, of trying to cover up her own failure to save him by inventing a wild story. The lies became more and more elaborate. And then my father-in-law, David, did the thing that tipped the world on its axis. He looked right at me, his eyes as cold and dead as a winter sky, and said, "For God's sake, it was just a dog. Just a dog." 7 words. 7 words to erase a life. 7 words to dismiss years of love, companionship, and unwavering loyalty. 7 words that told me my grief was invalid, my love was foolish, and his life was worthless. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The profound, suffocating grief that had been crushing me for days instantly transmuted into white-hot rage. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was fighting. The decision to sue them was never about the money. Not for a second. It was about forcing them to stand in a public forum in front of a judge and have their lies exposed. It was about making them understand that his life mattered. It was the only voice I had left to speak for him. The first lawyer I spoke to, a woman with kind eyes but a weary voice, laid out the brutal truth of the system, something every devastated pet owner who seeks justice needs to hear. "In the eyes of the law," she said gently but firmly, "your dog is considered personal property. Legally, he has the same standing as a television or a toaster." My heart, already broken, just sank to the floor. Felt like a second death. A toaster doesn't greet you at the door. A TV doesn't lick your tears away. She explained that in most states, including ours, when you sue for the death of a pet, you can typically only recover the fair market value. Basically what it would cost to buy a replacement, plus any vet bills you incurred. The cold, hard, economic logic of the law has no place for a broken heart, for the gaping hole a companion leaves behind. She told me that getting any damages for emotional distress or loss of companionship was an incredible long shot, something courts almost never award in these cases. "The system," she said with a sigh, "is about 100 years behind our hearts when it comes to animals." But she also offered a glimmer of hope. She mentioned that the legal landscape is, ever so slowly, starting to change. My lawyer pointed to a few pioneering states like Tennessee, which have passed specific statutes allowing for non-economic damages for the loss of a companion animal. She was clear. She warned me that since we were in a different state, we couldn't rely on that precedent directly, but we could use the spirit of it to appeal to the judge's fundamental humanity. So why $10,000? It wasn't a number we ever expected to actually get. It was a statement. It was a symbol. We calculated the cost of a purebred golden retriever puppy from a reputable breeder. We added in the thousands in vet bills from the pointless last-ditch attempt to save his life. We added the cost of his cremation. And then we added a significant demand for punitive damages, a legal fine designed specifically to punish wrongdoers for malicious or fraudulent conduct. The number was meant to be a headline. It was meant to say, his life wasn't worthless. His absence has created a $10,000 hole in our lives. You don't get to just walk away. The moment my in-laws were served with the lawsuit, the thin veil of civility was ripped away and it became all-out war. They refused to even consider settling out of court for a smaller amount. Pride and arrogance wouldn't let them. They hired a shark of a lawyer, the kind you see in movies, who immediately started sending these intimidating, jargon-filled letters designed to scare us into dropping the suit. Then came the smear campaign, and it was more painful than any legal threat. Suddenly, to the rest of the family and their social circle, I was the villain. I was greedy. I was unhinged. I was trying to extort my own dear in-laws over a dead animal. People we'd known for years, people who had been at our wedding, suddenly stopped talking to us. Phone calls went unanswered. We were uninvited from family gatherings. The family split right down the middle, a deep, ugly fracture that will likely never heal. The depositions were a unique form of psychological torture. Their lawyer grilled me for hours in a soulless conference room, his questions dripping with insinuation. He tried to paint me as an obsessive, unstable pet owner who was projecting her issues onto the dog. Then it was their turn. Under oath, they stuck to their story. It was a tragic accident. He darted into the road. They were devastated. But the more they talked, the more their carefully constructed narrative began to fray at the edges. Their timelines didn't match up with each other's. Their description of the car that supposedly hit him was impossibly vague. It was dark, my mother-in-law said. It happened so fast, my father-in-law added. They were lying, and frankly they were terrible at it. Watching them squirm, seeing their eyes shift and their hands tremble, only hardened my resolve. Our day in court finally came months later. It was small claims court, which meant no jury. Just us, them, and a judge who looked tired and overworked before we even started. The room was small, sterile, and suffocatingly quiet. My in-laws sat at the opposite table, refusing to even look at me. My lawyer was brilliant. She was calm, methodical, and relentless. She laid out the timeline of events from the moment we left them with Barnaby to the moment they finally, belatedly, took him to the vet. She presented Dr. Evans's testimony and the official report detailing the nature of his injuries. Injuries inconsistent with their story. And then she brought out our secret weapon, the text messages. She put up on a screen for the judge to see dozens and dozens of texts my mother-in-law had sent my husband in the months leading up to Barnaby's death. Complaints about his barking. Complaints about the dog smell in our house. Bitter little remarks about the amount of attention I gave him. Their own words, in black and white, established a clear pattern of animosity. They showed motive. They showed malice. Then it was my turn to speak. My lawyer asked me just one simple question. Can you tell the court about Barnaby? And I did. I didn't talk about fair market value or legal standing or property. I talked about how he would wait by the front window for me every single day, and how his whole body would convulse with joy the moment my car pulled into the driveway. I talked about the time my mom died and I was sobbing on the kitchen floor and he came over and just laid down next to me, licking the tears off my face for almost an hour. I looked at the judge, a man I'd never met, and said through my own tears, he wasn't property. He was my family. And they took him from me. They lied about it and they called him worthless. When my in-laws took the stand, their story completely imploded under my lawyer's precise cross-examination. She poked hole after hole in their timeline. She questioned why they didn't call us immediately. She asked why they had him cremated so quickly before we could even say goodbye. They contradicted each other. They became flustered and angry. The judge just listened, his face giving absolutely nothing away. The judge leaned back in his large leather chair and the room was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. He started by saying, the law in this state is clear. An animal, by legal definition, is personal property. My heart hit the floor with a thud. I felt the air leave my lungs. He went on, for that reason I cannot award damages for emotional distress or loss of companionship, as much as I may personally sympathize. I felt my husband's hand grip mine tightly. This is it, I thought. We lost. After all this, they win. However, the judge said, and his eyes shifted, locking directly onto my in-laws, I find the defendant's testimony to be inconsistent, evasive, and ultimately not credible. He said that based on the veterinary findings and their own text messages showing clear animus, he found it more likely than not that they were directly responsible for the dog's death through malicious actions or, at the very least, criminal negligence. He awarded me the full cost of the emergency vet bills. He awarded the full cost of the cremation. He cited the state average for a purebred golden retriever puppy and awarded me his full replacement value. Then he looked dead at my in-laws, his expression one of pure contempt. He said that because their actions were not merely accidental but malicious and intentional, and because they then lied about it under oath, he was also awarding significant punitive damages to punish them for their conduct and deter others from such behavior. The total came to $4,800. It wasn't the $10,000 we had asked for. But it wasn't zero. It was a judgment. They were being held accountable financially and publicly. Section 8. The Aftermath and Reflection. As the judge banged his gavel, bringing the proceedings to a close, he said one more thing, looking right at me with a softness that wasn't there before. "Ma'am," he said, "while the law may call him property, I understand that you lost a member of your family. My ruling is based on the law as it stands today, not perhaps as it should be." In that moment, with that small but profound acknowledgement, I finally cried. Not tears of rage or grief, but of relief. That was the real victory. The money didn't matter. It was never about the money. What mattered was that an officer of the court had called them liars and made them pay for their cruelty. Their reputation in their community and within the fractured remains of our family was destroyed. We are, of course, no longer in contact, and the family is broken in a way that can never be repaired. But I don't regret it. I fought for Barnaby. I made sure his life, his love, and his memory weren't just dismissed with 3 callous words. The law is slow and it's imperfect and it's cold. But for one day in one small courtroom we made it listen. For one day my dog wasn't just a toaster. His life mattered. This whole nightmare taught me that fighting for our pets in the legal system is an incredibly difficult, uphill battle. You have to be prepared for a system that sees your family member as an object. But it's a fight worth having. If there's a pet who changed your life, who is more than just an animal to you, I would be honored to hear about them. Tell me their name in the comments below. Let's fill this space with their memory. And if you believe the law should catch up to our hearts and recognize our animal companions as the family they truly are, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about fighting for what's right, even when it feels impossible. Thank you for listening.